It was a night when the desert sky turned into a burning battlefield, and America realized the world had changed forever. On August 2nd, 1990, before sunrise could touch the sands of the Arabian Peninsula, Saddam Hussein's Iraqi forces stormed across the border into Kuwait. The invasion wasn't just sudden, it was shocking. Kuwait, a wealthy but militarily small nation, found itself overwhelmed in hours. Iraqi tanks rolled through Kuwait City, government buildings fell, and the global oil market shook violently. But for the United States, this wasn't just another conflict on the evening news. Kuwait was a strategic ally. The invasion threatened global oil supply, regional stability, and the delicate balance of post-Cold War geopolitics. More importantly, it signaled a dangerous message. Unchecked aggression was back on the world stage. President George H.W. Bush delivered a clear response. This will not stand. For many Americans, memories of Vietnam were still raw. The hesitation, the confusion, the political divide. But this time, the circumstances were different. The U.S. wasn't acting alone. More than 35 nations formed a coalition, one of the largest military alliances in history. Europe, the Middle East, Asia, all united against Iraq's occupation. Operation Desert Shield began. American troops, ships, and aircraft rapidly deployed to Saudi Arabia to prevent Iraq from invading southward. The world watched as thousands of U.S. soldiers stepped into the scorching desert, preparing for a conflict no one wanted but everyone expected. Behind the scenes, diplomacy crackled. The UN issued sanctions. Negotiations failed repeatedly. Saddam Hussein refused to withdraw. He believed his military, one of the largest in the Middle East, could resist any foreign intervention. But the U.S. was preparing something the world had never seen, a high-tech, precision-driven, air-ground campaign powered by cutting-edge surveillance, stealth aircraft, and satellite-guided weaponry. America was about to demonstrate what modern warfare really looked like in the 1990s. By January 1991, the countdown was over. American families sat in living rooms, glued to the news. Soldiers in Saudi Arabia pressed their faces against radios. Journalists tightened their gear. Even Saddam's inner circle sensed what was coming. Then, on the night of January 17, 1991, the sky exploded. Stealth bombers pierced Iraqi airspace. Cruise missiles launched from U.S. Navy ships curled across the sky like metal serpents. Anti-aircraft fire lit up Baghdad. CNN broadcast the assault live, a first in history. Millions of American viewers watched the first hours of a war unfold in real time. The Gulf War had officially begun, and the world could feel the earth shifting beneath its feet. The air campaign had shredded Iraq's command centers, radar systems, and supply lines. For weeks, U.S. and coalition aircraft flew over 100,000 sorties, dropping precision-guided bombs that crippled Iraq's war machine. Highways turned into twisted metal, bunkers into craters, and key infrastructure vanished under targeted strikes. But the moment everyone feared and anticipated was a ground invasion. On February 24, 1991, Operation Desert Storm transitioned to its ground phase. American Marines pushed into Kuwait from the east, while U.S. Army Armored Divisions executed an enormous left-hook maneuver through the desert, bypassing the strongest Iraqi defenses. This wasn't just brilliant strategy, it was stunning execution. American M1 Abrams tanks cut through Iraqi armored units with unmatched speed and power. Night vision allowed U.S. forces to move effortlessly in darkness, overwhelming Iraqi soldiers who often didn't even see what hit them. Meanwhile, entire Iraqi divisions began surrendering. Some approached U.S. troops holding makeshift white flags fashioned from shirts, towels, or even scraps of paper. Many Iraqi soldiers were starving, exhausted, and demoralized after weeks of air strikes. They weren't fighting for Saddam, they were fighting to survive. In the United States, viewers watched in awe. The Vietnam Syndrome, long seen as America's fear of military entanglement, began to fade. This war felt different. Clear objectives, broad global support, overwhelming force, and rapid success. Then came the pivotal moment, the liberation of Kuwait City. After 7 months of occupation, Kuwaiti citizens filled the streets, waving American flags and cheering coalition forces. The images traveled across U.S. media, echoing a sharp message. Freedom had been restored. Less than 100 hours after ground war began, President Bush declared a ceasefire. The coalition had achieved its goal. Kuwait was free, Iraqi forces were crushed, and the world had witnessed one of the shortest and most decisive military campaigns in modern history. But beneath the swift victory, darker layers remained. Burning oil fields, retreating Iraqi soldiers trapped on a highway of death, and the looming question, what would become of Saddam Hussein? The war was over, but the story was far from finished. War is never clean, even when victory is swift. As Iraqi forces retreated from Kuwait, they unleashed a catastrophic environmental attack, setting more than 600 oil wells on fire. Flames rose hundreds of feet into the air, turning daylight into darkness. Thick black smoke blotted out the sun. Soot rained down like toxic snow. U.S. troops described the sky as a permanent eclipse. Firefighters from around the world, America, Canada, Hungary, China, battled the blazes for months. The environmental damage was historic. Millions of barrels of oil burned daily, poisoning air, soil, and water. For many Americans watching from home, these images became symbols of Saddam's spiteful final act. But the cost of the war was also counted in human lives. In total, about 294 American service members lost their lives during the conflict, a surprisingly low number given the scale of operations, but each one a profound loss for families back home. Thousands more suffered injuries, trauma, or long-term health issues linked to toxic exposures. For Iraqi forces, casualties were far higher, estimated between 20,000 and 35,000 killed. Many were young conscripts with little training or equipment. The war exposed the brutal truth of military imbalance. Kuwaiti civilians endured torture, executions, and forced disappearances under Iraqi occupation. When Kuwait City was liberated, mass graves revealed harrowing stories of those who resisted. Financially, the war cost the U.S. around $61 billion, though allies like Saudi Arabia, Japan, and Germany covered much of the expense. It became one of the few modern wars where America spent relatively little compared to the scale of operations, a fact often highlighted in U.S. political debate. Then there was the question of Iraq's losses. Infrastructure destroyed, economy shattered, society fractured, and a dictator still in power, angrier and more isolated than ever. The Gulf War ended quickly, but the damage, physical, emotional, and geopolitical, would echo for decades. After the ceasefire, the world took stock. Who won? Militarily and politically, the United States and its coalition achieved a clear, decisive victory. Kuwait was liberated. Iraq's military was devastated. American leadership on the world stage had been reaffirmed. For many in the U.S., especially after years of uncertainty, the Gulf War restored confidence in America's global role. Who lost? Saddam's regime, unquestionably. Iraq's infrastructure, military capability, and international standing collapsed. Sanctions strangled the nation. The no-fly zones enforced by the U.S. and allies restricted Saddam's power even further. But there were deeper, more complex shifts too. The Gulf War showcased a new era of warfare. Stealth technology, satellite-guided bombs, real-time media coverage, coalition-driven strategy. For Washington, it marked the dawn of America's unipolar moment, the era where the U.S. stood as the world's uncontested superpower after the Cold War. For the Middle East, the war redrew alliances. Arab nations publicly supported U.S. intervention, with some hosting American bases that remain to this day. At the same time, resentment simmered among groups opposed to Western presence in the region, setting the stage for conflicts that would erupt in later years. The Gulf War also influenced U.S. military culture. Veterans returned home to praise, not protests. Military technology leapt forward, and America became more confident in quick, surgical interventions abroad. Yet, one decision remains controversial: the choice not to remove Saddam Hussein. President Bush argued that overthrowing Saddam was not part of the UN mandate, and attempting it would risk chaos. Many analysts agree. Others argue it allowed a future crisis to grow, one that would explode a decade later in the 2003 Iraq War. Either way, the Gulf War reshaped global politics in ways still felt today. More than 3 decades later, the Gulf War stands as a turning point, a blueprint for modern conflict. For America, It became a symbol of precision warfare, coalition unity, and rapid victory with minimal casualties. It showed how technology, strategy, and global diplomacy could fuse into a near-flawless operation. But it also served as a warning. The no-fly zones and sanctions created a decade of tension between the U.S. and Iraq. Small clashes continued. Missile strikes were launched on Iraqi targets throughout the 1990s. Saddam grew more defiant, convincing Washington that future conflict might be inevitable. The Gulf War also introduced America to televised 24-hour war coverage. CNN's live broadcast changed journalism forever. For the first time, war wasn't delayed footage. It was happening right now in American living rooms. Culturally, the Gulf War shaped a generation of U.S. soldiers and families. It forged alliances that still define the Middle East. It taught Washington the power and limits of global coalitions. And perhaps most importantly, it raised the complex question: what happens after the bombs stop falling? The Gulf War ended quickly, but the decisions made and avoided in 1991 would ripple into future wars, diplomatic crises, and political debates all the way to the present. As history shows, some wars end on paper, but continue to shape the world long after the smoke clears. And so the Gulf War stands not just as a victory, but as a warning, a reminder that every chapter in history begins with a spark. And the night the desert caught fire was a spark the world will never forget. If this story kept you watching, hit the like button, share this video with others, and subscribe for more cinematic history content.